Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Benefits of Managing the Employee Experience. Fred Stawitz and I are just delighted to be joining you today to give you some information in terms of the employee experience and how that's driven by managers in organizations. So I'm Dwight Mihalicz, I'm president of Effective Managers. We're joined by Fred, who's an award-winning author. He's a program implementation manager, and he's an international speaker. But at the end of the day, Fred really focuses in on helping organizations to be more effective, and he's done a lot of really great work in this area. So I'm just delighted that you can join us today, Fred.
Thank you.
And my own background, I've been working over the last 10 years in effective managers, really trying to understand how owners of organizations can ensure that their workforces are appropriately aligned, and the work of managers is actually critical in that. And we'll be talking a bit more about that as we go through. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Fred, just to give us a quick opening on what we're going to be covering today.
So what we're really talking about here is what's important, and that is that the organization has to be profitable. Has to be profitable today, tomorrow, and going forward. And so if we want sustainable profitability, that means that you're going to have at least the same level of profits or more going into the future. And the factors that support sustainable profitability are safe, productive operations and good customer service. You've got to have all three. Let's look at if any one of those drops out. Say you don't have safe operations, then you could have fines, you could have expenses, you could have loss of productivity. You don't have the mechanism to produce the products and services for the customer. If productivity is the one that drops out, then you're losing the products and services. It doesn't matter if you have good customer service, doesn't matter if you have a good operation, safe operation, you're not going to be able to provide what the customer needs and wants, and therefore that desire to work with you is going to migrate to some other organization. If you have poor customer service, then over time, even though you may have a good product and service, you may have safe operation, the customer is going to look for other options going forward. These things may not, some of them cause overnight issues, some of them may be gradually problematic, but all of these need to be solidly in place to support sustainable profitability. Okay? Mm-hmm. And the reason is because employee engagement. The foundation for these are engaged employees. That's employees that are engaged in being safe, employees that are engaged in high levels of productivity, and employees that are engaged in customer service. So if you start with sustainable profitability and you look back, then the foundation for that are safe, productive operations, customer service, and the foundation for that, it all defaults to employee engagement. Now, employee engagement has been a kind of a buzzword for many years, but it's very important. And if it's not done right, if employees are not engaged, then you can't guarantee that you have safe, productive operations and good customer service. So, buzzword or not, it's an effective mechanism that has to be in place in your organization if you're even thinking of sustainable profitability.
You're absolutely right on that one, Fred. Thank you for that introduction. That's great. In terms of employee engagement, there's research that's been done by Heskett also over the last about 20 years actually, and then redone just a few years ago, where he made this very critical relationship between employee engagement, customer satisfaction, and organizational performance, and he shows the correlations very clearly, and that's been replicated by many different people in many different organizations. And if we look at our own research at Effective Managers, we found that you can put managerial leadership at the front of that chain. But what I want to really dive into is this employee engagement thought and show you what some of the benefits are of highly engaged employees in the workforce. So if you think about an organization and the number of engaged employees that they have, if you group the organizations with the highest levels of engagement, the top quartile, and compare them to organizations with the lowest levels of engagement in the bottom quartile, you see some amazing results. What you'll find is that 48% fewer safety incidents, So if you're in the top quartile, 48% fewer safety incident, 41% less quality incidents, 43% lower absenteeism. And those numbers are just crazy if you think about what a major difference that makes. And on the positive side, the good things that happen: higher customer ratings, 10%, higher productivity, 21%, higher profitability, 22%. Just today, Gallup released a study that they've done replicating this research with thousands of companies all around the world. So they've now got global data on that, and these numbers are this good, and they actually dive a little deeper into some of them. If you'd like that, drop me an email and I'll send you a copy of that paper. But it really reinforces the importance of employee engagement. So it's almost intuitive. We've been talking about employee engagement in organizations for so long, and yet when you look at the data over the last 20 years, what you find is that the number of engaged employees in organizations has been relatively the same. It's kind of been hovering plus or minus 30%. In the last couple of years, it's had a bit of an uptick. But from my eye as a researcher, it's kind of in the error of margin. So we really need to start asking ourselves, what's going on in organizations? We know that higher engaged workforces are better. We know that if we can have our employees more focused in on the right work at the right time, it's going to be better for the organization, and it's going to be better for our financial returns. And yet somehow organizations have not been successful in doing that. And we are in this situation then in 2020, where 64% of the employees in the American workforce are actively disengaged. So this is a problem for us. So what's going on? What's beneath that? Research that was published by Gallup early this year really reflects the research that we've been doing at Effective Managers. So I want to share this with you because it reinforces so strongly what we need to do in organizations to drive this employee engagement to where it needs to be. This study was done with over the last 5 years, so starting in 2015. They interviewed over 50,000 managers and had over 500 questions to really get to the heart of the matter. And they just published the results in the first quarter of this year. It's the manager. So this, again, reinforces the research that we've done ourselves. It's the manager experience, those things that managers do with their subordinate employees, their team members, that really drives employee engagement. It's not something that can be done organization-wide in terms of a training program or increased salaries or better benefits or a pool room in the lunchroom. It's really about managers doing their managerial leadership work in the organization.
If you extend this chart goes back to 2000, but if you extend it back another 20 years, it doesn't change much over that time either. And what we mentioned is employee engagement. That term has been around during that entire time frame, and we haven't had a significant change. From my perspective, that means that we're not approaching employee engagement in the way that we need to approach it to make these numbers change, to get rid of, to cut down on that 64% disengaged. And a note about Gallup. Gallup is phenomenal in terms of their research. This slide indicates 50,000 plus managers, but they've surveyed over 1 million employees. Their numbers are probably the best I've ever seen in terms of looking at the details of what engages employees in the workplace. And what needs to happen, I think, is that we need to listen to what these surveys are telling us and actually act upon it and look at what are the details, what is it that engages employees, because it's not just employees at the line level, it's employees all through the structure of the organization, all the way from top to bottom. If there are issues with employee engagement at any level, there's issues with employee engagement at all levels, and there's frustration, and the organization isn't going to be as profitable as it could be if these are not addressed.
Great point, Fred. Managers, executives, directors, they're all employees of the organization as well, just that some of them also have managerial leadership duties.
exactly. So we're talking about employee engagement. We talked about connecting the profitability. We need safe, productive operations. We need excellent customer service. To get those, we need an engaged workforce. We need employees engaged in safe, productive operations, engaged in serving the customers. And that means behavior. The behaviors that the employees exhibit are what employee engagement is all about. Behavior is driven by the experience of the employee. How does the employee, when they walk in the job, when they sit down at their desk and they come to work, whether it's out in the field or in an office, what is it that they experience? I've led a discussion with a group of nearly 50 HR directors, and the focus of the discussion was on how do we understand employee engagement? How do we engage our employees? So what we started with was we went around the room, asked everyone individually and had them respond. What is it that you like about your job? What is it that makes you enjoy going to work? Every one of them had something that they could toss out really readily that was part of their personal experience that they liked about the job. Then we went around the room again, the same group, and asked them, what is it that you don't like about their job? Again, somebody had an answer that was readily available. They knew exactly what they didn't like about the job. The point is, and these were at the director level. You could do the same exercise with employees at the line level. You could do the same with managers, supervisors, and most likely everyone could toss out something that they love about their job and something that they dislike about the job. In terms of employee engagement, the challenge with those employee experiences and the behaviors that they drive is to increase the number of things that people like about their jobs and decrease the number of things that they don't. But it's not necessarily a question of really understanding, because everyone inherently can understand what they like or don't like about the job, and that it's pretty relative to human nature that if you don't like this about the job, there's somebody else in the organization that doesn't like that same thing. So it's not a question of employee engagement. I just don't understand. It's too scientific. It's too involved. It's human nature and it's behavior driven. And so the focus needs to be on what do the employees experience when they step on the job, and that's employees at all levels of the organization. One of the things I discovered when I started looking at this was that there was no consistency in how you assess the work environment. There was no terminology to talk about the environment. So you ask somebody, do you like your job or do you not like the job? And they'd say yes or no, but there wasn't any subtle layers of this is the type of environment I'm in. What dawned on me was that an environment that everyone can relate to, that everyone has to deal with every day, is the weather. And the weather, the factors that make up the weather are just as complex as all the factors that go into behavior and culture in the workplace. So I took a look at the behavior of the environment as the weather. And there are really 4 types of environments. If you look out the window, we can relate sunny to a supportive environment. We can relate windy to a benign environment where management is somewhat missing in action. We can relate rainy to a contentious environment where there's a low grade of conflict always going on. And we can relate stormy to a very antagonistic environment where there's a high level of conflict going on. In each of these environments, if the employee recognizes what type of environment they're operating in, then they're better able to realize what they need to do to be successful in that operation. And what we're going to do today is kind of take an interesting view of this, in that we're going to look at it from the employee's view, and we're going to look at it from management view as to what's the most effective way to approach running the business. You want the employee to have a good experience. You want them to be engaged. You want them to produce safe, productive, good customer service, and you want the organization to be profitable. there's a similarity between what employees need and want and what management needs and wants to produce those results. Everyone in the organization should be oriented toward producing those results. And that's what we're going to take an interesting look at today. Let's go to the next slide. Let's look at these individually. Let's start on the antagonistic workplace environment first. From the employee's perspective, their boss sees you as the enemy. That may not make sense to you, but many of us have been in workplace environments where that's the sense that we get. Makes unreasonable and confusing demands, sets you up for failure, provides strong negative attention, criticizes your performance, minimizes accomplishments. Essentially what you're sensing or what you're receiving is you receive strong negative attention for your boss. Now, how many people enjoy working in that kind of environment? Probably minimal, unless they have some kind of mental issue. Most people find this kind of environment untenable, unsustainable, and just something that they'd rather not deal with. What would be the management perspective on an environment like this, Dwight?
That's a really interesting question, and it's unfortunate that this kind of situation is in organizations, but I see it all the time where the boss is typically so self-absorbed, they're more concerned with their perception of what's happening in the organization and their reputation looking up, that they see the employees as kind of tools in terms of getting done what they need to get done, and not really thinking about the team atmosphere and how you really build the kind of engagement that you need for success.
Yeah, and there's no need to attach blame to any of this. Certain bosses may operate this way by intention. Other bosses may operate this way because they are so stressed with their situation that they're trying to keep up. They're simply trying to maximize the success of the operation, minimize their stress, and they're getting stressed from all sides. So it's not a matter of blaming the boss for behaving this way. It's a matter of looking at it and saying, is this the type of environment that we want to put our employees in if we want them to be successful and productive and help us earn a profit?
And adding to that is bearing in mind that your boss also has a boss, and it may be starting 1 or 2 levels up, which is putting this kind of pressure all the way down the chain.
Yeah. Let's look at the next one. A little bit nicer environment, but still problematic. Your boss views you as the problem, offers misleading or ambiguous directions, creates obstacles, provides non-supportive attention, seeks opportunities to criticize your performance. Essentially here, you receive non-supportive attention from your boss. From my perspective, the distinction between this environment, because it's very similar to the antagonistic one, is the difference between whether the boss wants to get rid of you, just exit you from the organization with the slightest provocation, or whether they actually realize that they need you and they want to keep you a little bit off guard because for whether it's control issues or whatever the rationale is. Why a boss does these things is less important than the fact that they are done, and that's what the employees experience. In this type of scenario, it's again very similar to the previous one. So is there a difference in the management perception?
It's in this case, it's a question of degree, I think. So all of the factors that we talked about in the previous one could apply here. It could also be just a lack of managerial leadership skills on the of your boss, in terms of them not really perhaps being aware of how they should be managing, and as a result create these obstacles or offer misleading or ambiguous directions, not so much intentionally, but simply because they don't know better. So they're not providing you the kind of support that you know you need to be successful. So as a result, your boss starts to see you as the problem because you're always up there trying to do things in a way that they're not sure about.
Yeah, and again, it may not be intentional. It may be that they're overwhelmed. A large problem that I see is that people are promoted into positions that they're not prepared for those positions. They're not provided the training, the orientation, or the support that they need. So again, and what they're doing is just passing down the ranks what they're experiencing. It's very, very challenging. I have a lot of empathy for anybody in a management position, because they're getting pushed from top, and they're getting pushed from the bottom, and they have to balance that scenario. And so if the pushes they get from the top are not supportive of them being successful, then unless they push those down, if they push a more success-oriented structure to their team, then they're having to provide an umbrella effect, and that is simply increasing their stress levels dramatically. So I have a lot of empathy for bosses, and it's not a matter of blaming the boss for this type of behavior. So it's looking at why is the behavior there, and is that what we really want in the organization?
In research I've done, we've found that in almost 50% of situations, managers actually don't have that degree of capability that is the next level of complexity in the organization. So there's overlap, and often there's competition for who's going to make the decision, because the manager of that individual just simply doesn't have the capability to add value to their subordinate position. So it starts to look like this pretty quickly.
Let's go to the next one. In this one, your boss provides little or no direction. This is called a benign work environment. It's the windy environment where you're being buffeted and blown around by other elements of the organization that are requesting and looking at the employees for response to either questions or for information that they need or actions that they need to be taken. And your boss is not providing the buffer to sort out what really makes sense and what's really within your job description. So your boss provides little or no direction, allows you to be unduly influenced by external forces, is neither supportive nor overly punitive, ignores you unless confronted with a serious issue. It's as though you're on your own within that organization, which is a very risky kind of place to be, because you're making decisions without having an interface with your boss to confirm that those are the right decisions and having the support behind them. And then if something goes wrong, the boss can always point at you if they have that if they're taking that type of approach, and say, why'd you do that? I didn't approve that. They can always say that, but then they weren't involved at the level they needed to be involved in what you were doing. So it's a very, very risky. You receive little or no attention from your boss, but unless something goes wrong, then you can receive a lot of attention. You can be in a really challenging position. This highlights the fact that in any type of these previous workplace environments that we talked about, it's important for the employee to document what they understood their assignment to be, if there was an assignment at all, what they did, who they talked to, what the results were. Document in terms of performance and productivity and results, not so much in terms of the kind of complying with HR policies and stuff like that. You don't want the employee to be in that kind of a position, but just in terms of what they did, why they did it, what the results were. And that's good documentation in any case to have for performance reviews, not just for defending yourself if necessary.
It's what I often see in organizations. Everything you said is bang on, Fred. What I also see in organizations is often managers, bosses like this can be quite successful in their role. And what happens, they're so successful. It could be, you know, very senior level business development. It could be whatever it is, but they tend to be on the road all the time. They're so focused in on what their personal deliverables are, that they can create success at that level, and they're well respected from above in the organization, but they don't value the work of managerial leadership. So they don't hold meetings with their staff. They don't give them feedback sessions, and it feels like this to their team members, because just the boss is never available. They're always out doing something else, which is important work. So it puts the employees in a really difficult situation. The team members really don't know how to complain, because they recognize that the work that the boss is doing is valuable, but they're not getting the kind of direction they need to be successful. So they really feel like they're left hanging in the wind, and have this windy type of situation.
And if they're not able to effectively delegate, then they're having a lot to do. They're overtaxed with what they've accepted for themselves to do, and not enlisting the support that they could have if they could effectively delegate and develop their team to be a support structure for their activities.
Exactly.
All right, let's go to the good one. Supportive work environment. Your manager treats you with respect, values your contribution, provides supportive attention, shields you from undue external influences, rewards good ideas, accomplishments, and partners in your development. Essentially, you receive supportive attention from your boss. Now, again, I've had people dismiss supportive work environments because they relate those to the game rooms, the distractions from work. But think about it. If you think about the weather, you can go out on a sunny day and work up quite a sweat and get really tired being productive. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're talking about here, is that you have the tools, you have the training, you have the support from your management, you have what you need to be successful in your job. And the question that always comes to my mind is, why wouldn't management want to provide you that? Because why would they hire you if they didn't want you to be successful? It seems a little bit missing the point. If you hire somebody and then flip a coin, is this person going to actually be successful in this role or not? And just kind of leave it up to fate. Why not take an active role with the employees and create an environment that ensures that they're successful? There may be a small number then that don't measure up, but the larger number do. And certainly the numbers would be different than what the Gallup polls have indicated with employee engagement. In a supportive, if we had many more supportive work environments than we had the non-supportive environments. Thoughts?
It's an exercise I do back in the old days when we used to actually stand in the front of rooms and people were in the room with you talking about these things. And I'd ask the question to think about the one word that the word that describes the best manager you've ever had. So what is the one word that best describes the manager you've ever had? And we have people think about that. And then we ask how many of your managers that you've had in your career kind of fit within that criteria of being a good manager. And unfortunately, it's usually not in the majority. Managers who fit in the green zone here tend to be in the minority inside organizations. So the challenge in the organization, from the owner or the CEO right through the executives, is how do we ensure that we're matching capabilities and skills and knowledge of individuals to roles, so that managers do have the ability to manage well and then feel accountable for doing their managerial leadership work and then actually carry it out. So we could have a lot more of the green environments in organizations, but unfortunately, it tends to be in the minority.
Yeah. Now let's look at the next slide. Brings us back to the four, and if we just click forward, then we identify the ones that are non-supportive. As Dwight was mentioning, if you have a manager that's operating in any one of these non-supportive, the windy benign, the rainy contentious, or the stormy antagonistic, if they're operating within that environment, or they're creating that environment for their employees, then that says something about the organizational culture and the environment that the organization has created. And that means that it's not just the individual manager, but it's the person that's overseeing that individual, and it goes all the way up then. If there's any element of dysfunction or non-supportive work environment within the organization, it's an issue that should be addressed at the top down, all the way down. So there's never one rotten apple or one apple that's rotting in a basket. There's always the ones around it that are enabling that to happen, and the ones that are either enabling or ignoring that that's happening and not addressing it. So there's absolutely no reason that you shouldn't have, or that you can't have in any organization, a supportive environment. And again, that doesn't mean that everybody gets back massages when they first come in, and they get counseling for an hour after they get to work, and are treated with latte and croissants. That means the work gets done, and the work may be extremely challenging, but without a supportive environment, what's happening is that the employees have to take a certain amount of attention away from productivity, away from safety, away from serving customers, simply to defend themselves and operate within these other non-supportive environments. What we're saying is that in a supportive environment, we're able to allow employees to devote the majority of their attention to getting the work done that makes the money that keeps the organization afloat.
I think that's absolutely right. And there's a lot of different factors that come to play. I've got a slide coming up towards the end where we'll talk about a model for all of the things that need to be in place so that the majority, or hopefully all managers, could be the supportive sunny ones as opposed to some of these other ones. What I'd like to say now is just for you to just think, and in any organization that you've worked in, if you look across all of the managers, the directors, the executives in the department, there's always some areas that are doing better. They do better on the employee engagement surveys. They do better on having the performance management reviews done on time, whatever it might be. And what you will find is, if you look there in those departments, there's the head of that unit would be described as one of the supportive managers, somebody that has that environment. They're doing their managerial leadership work, and as a result, the teams are performing better, and it shows in organizations.
Yeah, there's very, very few people that would identify that their favorite boss, or the boss that they remember as being one that they enjoyed working for. And I actually differentiate between boss and manager. Boss, I tend to put in the bad category. Manager are the ones that are actually doing the job the way it was intended to do. Are usually in the supportive category.
Yes.
Now, we talked about performance, and performance, when we're talking about here, situational performance, all performance is situational. Let's look at why that is. And performance, think of that not only as producing the products and services that the organization wants, but also safe performance, and also customer performance in serving customers. So the performance here, as we're talking about, is across the board. Now, the quality of performance depends on the situation. An example is, say we have an opera singer. The opera singer is performing in a fantastic concert hall. They're trained. They've been trained for years. They have a phenomenal voice. The acoustics in the hall are suited for the performance. There's an orchestra. There's staff behind the scenes that have allowed management of ticket sales and all the maintenance and operations for the opera house. That performance, that individual can deliver an exemplary performance night after night after night for a long time, throughout probably their entire career, with a few exceptions of having a cold or something that intervenes. But for 99% of the time, they're going to be able to deliver a phenomenal performance. take that same individual, put them out on the airport runway. You've got the noise of jet engines, you've got no acoustic qualities that support being able to hear that individual. You've got the fumes from the jet engines, you've got the noise, the activities out there that are distracting. That individual, if at all, isn't going to be able to sustain a high level of performance out there on that tarmac. If you look at the difference between the two, you can, it's obvious which one is going to be able to sustain a high level of performance. So the idea is that performance is situational, and it depends. The reason that we talked about the different types of environments is because we're expecting employees to perform at the highest level possible in the organization to support sustainable profitability, but we're not paying attention. If we're not paying attention to the environment that we're putting them in, the situation that we're putting them in, then we're losing the ability to manage their performance. It's gonna hinge upon what that environment is. If it's a non-supportive environment, it leans more toward the airport tarmac than it does the concert hall. The supportive environment is going to be the concert hall, where all the things that they need to do a fantastic performance are in place. And if they're not, it's understandable why they're not. It may be budget issues, but at least there's an effort to make all those things happen. Let's go to the next one. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just jump in on that because I think it's a great analogy. And what I'd like to add to it is the thought that it's really the manager that controls the great majority of the factors that determine whether from the perspective of the team it's the concert hall or whether it's the airport terminal. So it really does come down to the manager. We've done work at Effective Managers over the last several years to look at all of the different managerial leadership practices. If you look, there's a lot of models out there, Drucker, Jacks, Mintzberg, and what we've done is distilled those into the 5 requirements of effective managers. What are those 5 things that managers need to do to ensure that their teams are performing well? So check out the website if you're interested in that. Back to you, Fred. I couldn't pass on that one.
Definitely. And what we're looking at is peak performance. Peak performance was a buzzword several years ago, but it still has application. Just like employee engagement, it has application and it has effectiveness if we look at it and understand it in the right context. Peak performance is what we want all employees to do, to perform at the best of their ability on a sustained level. But understanding that performance is situational, then peak performance is relative to the environment that you put them in, you put the employees in. So peak performance is only sustainable in a supportive environment. And the reason for that, I hinted at that before, is that in a non-supportive environment, employees have to spend attention defending themselves, explaining themselves, looking for resources, figuring out how to make something happen, where in a supportive environment, as many of those things as possible, based on budget and what the resources of the organization are in place and readily available in support of the employee. So if you are putting employees in a position, say the position with a benign environment where the manager's really busy running this way and that way, taking care of things that they've been tasked to do, but not spending time working through what the employees' needs are, then the employees is pretty much on their own trying to figure out, where do I get this? How do I get this? What do I need to do? How does this fit in with the organizational goals? And if I do this, do I run into problems or do I not? They're questions that are not necessarily invalid for any employee to ask, but if they're not afforded a place to get the answers and not afforded the opportunity to discuss those things with management, then they're spending an extra amount of time in that area, and that area is not providing performance, and therefore don't even consider peak performance in a non-supportive environment, because essentially you've cut off a certain percentage on the top just by overhead of of not having access to resources and training and what they need to be successful in their job. So the distinction really is, do you want your performance chart to be headed up with the green arrow, or do you want the performance chart to be headed down toward burnout? There's stress, it's a distinction between support and stress. Now, there's plenty of research on the fact that a certain amount of stress is good. There's a curve that's kind of like going up a hill. And just before you get to the top of the hill, at about 80% of the maximum for the hill is the peak performance area for stress. Once you top the hill, max out stress, and continue adding on stress, then productivity starts down the other side of the hill. And the further down the hill you go, the closer to burnout you get. And it's pretty understandable that any employee that hits burnout is just going to be non-productive at all and just a drain on resources for the organization. So you want to stay away from that far side of the hill, which means you want to stay away from excessive stress. However, in this environment, there's more than enough stress to go around just outside of the organization, in the market, in the personal finances for the individual, just on, do I have a job tomorrow? All those things are stressing them, and they're bringing that stress to the workplace. If you add on what I would call unnecessary stress because of the dysfunction of the organization or the lack of effectiveness of the organization, then you're pushing that employee toward burnout unnecessarily. Because if you focused a little bit more on providing support for them to be successful in the job that you hired them to do, and why wouldn't you, and you work toward helping them sustain peak performance, then your organization is going to benefit from that. You as a manager is going to benefit from that. Your management is going to benefit from that. They're going to see that you're a high-performing team, and you're going to gain in the long run by that. If you're producing burnout on your team, you're not going to gain from that. The organization isn't going to gain from that. No one is really. So it's looking at, do I provide extra support or do I provide extra stress? And if you provide the latter, then it's a path to the disaster eventually.
It's it is a vicious circle that's going to continue downward. You can get a little bit more productivity through increasing stress, but at the end of the day, it's a no-win formula. So the question becomes, what do you do about all of this? And Fred and I are going to now change gears a little bit, because it's from the perspective of, yes, we want to have those supportive organizations, and we want managers to be doing their managerial leadership work. But how do you understand, if you're the owner, the CEO, if you're the manager of a team, what is it that you need to think about? What is it that you need to do differently? Most enlightened organizations understand in one way or another some of the issues that Fred and I have been talking about. But the problem is that usually the solutions that they're going for are aimed at the symptoms. So, you know, the Gallup survey comes back and says we have poor communications. You try to put in more newsletters or have more meetings. But in fact, the issue is that the manager isn't doing their managerial leadership work. So employees aren't getting the right information at the right time. They call that communication, but it's a symptom of the underlying issue of managerial leadership. So what we really do need to do is really focus in on what do managers need to do to operate differently so that they can create this kind of supportive environment in the organizations. In looking at, we've talked about, leading up to this point, we've talked about the employee experience, and we've talked about the workplace environment pretty much in general. But and there's a lot of complexity to the workplace environment. There's a lot of factors going on, a lot of things that have to flow well for the organization to be effective and for you to achieve peak performance with the teams.
place to start is to start looking at some of what we've listed here are 10 of the key operational programs or programs within the organization. One, as Dwight focuses on with years of experience, is the managerial effectiveness. That's kind of encapsulates a lot of these others, but we can also pull out professional development. That's a training program, knowledge capture and sharing. That's are you solving problems over and over, or are you retaining the solutions to those problems and not having to reinvent the solution? Risk management and safety is a huge area that is often delegated as opposed to being a systemic approach to safe operations and managing risk. Safety, just a little note on that, safety is always in the rearview mirror. It's never guaranteed going forward. Managing the risk is what protects you going forward. Management of change, is that too detailed? Is every period and comma go through a whole bunch of signature processes, or is it reasonable? And the folks that are involved in the change, the partners for the change, are they informed on a timely basis? Performance management, is that a once a year thing, or is that ongoing? And that's again training and preparation for the manager to be able to do that. Workflow structure, resource management, organizational effects. You can continue to add to these, but the bottom line is that where is the organization, because it's not addressing these things, adding stress to the environment for the employee, for the manager, for the director, for the vice president. And it's not just when these things don't work, it's not just stress at the bottom of the chain, it's stress all the way up. I've had conversations with VPs of large organizations, and they've responded in the discussions in exactly the same way as a line employee in terms of their frustration with not having the organization operate in an effective manner.
And it's really problematic in this day and age, post-pandemic, and additional curves coming into in terms of that is reinforcing the work from home. It's reinforcing the need to change significantly, to pivot, to look at the customer experience and figure out how to improve that. All of these things require organizations to be as flexible and as nimble as possible. And if you don't have a managerial workforce in place that is doing good managerial leadership work, the teams are not appropriately aligned. So when it becomes time to be nimble, the organization stumbles because they don't have all their ducks in an order. So Fred and I have been working over the last couple of years, actually, but we've just launched earlier this year assessment programs which can help organizations get that snapshot of themselves. It's really hard, looking in a mirror. You yourself can look in the mirror and make observations about yourself, but they're always skewed because of your perceptions of yourself. It's the same in the organization. If you're looking at the organization yourself, your experience, your filters drive your perspective of what's happening in the organization. So having that feedback in terms of objective feedback, in terms of what's happening and what's not happening, what your strengths are and what some of the weaknesses may be, can be very, very helpful. The other thing I'd add is that this looks complex. There's a lot of different elements moving. And over my years, one of my challenges is, as a management consultant, to simplify things for organizations. So we've come up with a model. I can spend 90 minutes just on this model, but I want to give you a quick introduction to it, just to give you some insight. And there's more information on the website, and we have other courses on this as well. But if we think about what's happening in the organization, we can make an analogy to a tree. A tree is also a complex organism, but it's built in such a way that it's able to create output. And in terms of the output, what we're really thinking about is the culture, the branches. How do we work together? How do we shape ourselves? How do we do our work? The performance is like the foliage. Bright green leaves mean that we're healthy and doing well, and the profit is like the fruit in the tree. But we can't have a good, solid, healthy culture or good performance or good profit without other elements being in place. And I say profit, but if you're a not-for-profit organization, of course, services and delivery of programs are the equivalent. So what we need to do is we need to have those foundational elements at the root. We need to have a business model that makes sense. And this is where we have to be nimble, especially in times of disruption. And we need to have a strategy that makes sense and that is able to implement that business model in a way that is unique and adds value in the community and with your target market. And you need to have an organization design which ties together the tree and your strategy business model in terms of what is the complexity of our organization, how many layers do we need, how do we align our functions, and so on. So those two things are intertwined. And what joins them? What joins them is the trunk of the tree. It's what the strength of the tree is three different elements. An accountability and authority model is a language for how we work together in this organization and how we delegate or manage in this organization. If in most organizations, we use words in very different ways and people understand words in different ways. So delegation gets obscure and people really aren't able to focus in on the right work. The second element, which is like the trunk of the tree, the strength of the tree, is the managerial leadership. Are managers doing their managerial leadership work? Our own research shows that managers only spend 45% of their time on, they spend 45% of their time on non-value added work. So only 55% of their time on work that they themselves believe is important. So managerial leadership tends to suffer as a result of that. And then the third element is like the heartwood of the tree is the heart of the organization. I call it fit to role. How do you ensure that people in all roles, whether they're employees or managers, are capable of doing the work that they need to do? Are they at the right level of complexity? Do they have the right skills and knowledge? And do they value the work? So in summary, do we have the right structure in place? Are we aware of and measure our outcomes? And then how do we tie that together in terms of all of the different people aspects? Fred, any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, this is a fantastic metaphor for the businesses, because if you look, you want fantastic ripe apples coming out as a result. If the apples are not up to par, you don't necessarily, you take a look at the apple, but then you follow the structure down all the way to the roots and see where there's a problem. It may not be that the problem is at the apple. The problem may be that there's something blocking the managerial capability in the heartwood of the trunk of the tree. It may be that there's some contamination in the soil that's causing problems for the roots. No matter what you did at the apple, if you're not addressing the roots, then you're not going to fix the problem. It's the difference between addressing the symptom of the problem or addressing the root cause, which is why where the term root cause comes from, is that you've got to get down to what the actual source of the issue is. And what Dwight's very, very adept at, and what I'm learning at is how to follow that structure down to where the actual problem is, so that when you fix the problem, then it actually fixes the problem. It doesn't, if you, like say an employee is involved in a safety incident, you replace the employee, but the culture and the operation and the equipment that they were using puts somebody else that you replace in that position in just as a risky, untenable position. The incident's going to happen again with that other individual. What do? Keep firing and hiring, or do you address the environment and fix the environment so that the next person you put in there is going to be successful, or do you keep paying? It all gets down to profits and the sustainability of the profits in the organization. But it's a matter of whether you look at root causes or whether you look at just the symptoms and you address those without getting to the actual issue that's causing the problem.
Thank you, Fred. That was a really good summary, and that brings us to the end of the content. I did want to just quickly point out to you, but I've enabled you to unmute your microphones if you have some questions, or you can put them in the text. I want to point out some additional resources for you. Here you can find about our digital preparedness, digital readiness assessment assessment tool on the Effective Managers website, and do go there also. There's a lot of free information and supplementary information to what we've talked about on the website in terms of resources that are available for you, downloadable white papers. We have a YouTube channel where there's a lot of videotaped information. Videotape, that's an old word. We'll also have this webinar will be put on the YouTube channel as well, and we'll send you the link to that in case you want to forward this to anyone else you think would be interested in this information. And then finally, do feel free to connect with me on Facebook or Fred on Facebook, or sorry, connect with Fred or me on LinkedIn or with me on Facebook, and do feel free to register for the Effective Managers newsletter. We've got a lot of regular information that's going out that you might find interesting. So I'll just come back to see if you have any questions about the content that we've given to you today. You're also able to ask us any questions by email when we send out this information. You can respond to that, and we will answer anything that you might have. So anyone, sorry, Fred, go ahead.
Something for people to think about is that there's a whole plethora of challenges that organizations are going through now that are being, that are coming from outside the organization, but are relative to the operation within the organization. You've got the COVID-19 situation, obviously, which is predominantly on the news. That's causing a new way of operation and stressing an organization to have the ability to adapt and be flexible enough to look at new ways of operating. You've got also the issues with race and equality that are impending upon organizations, and that why would you not entertain a diverse workforce that is known for producing exemplary results in decision-making process to make sure that all various types of decisions are encountered and voiced. If you hire diverse workforces without looking at addressing some of the issues here, then it's kind of a turnover cycle that you're creating, because people aren't going to want to stay in an organization that's not providing them the support they need to be successful. There's also the challenge of the new technology with the digital technologies, and looking at how do we use those to solve problems. There's always a factor that when you're implementing something new, if you it's going to be somewhat disruptive on the front end. You don't want to layer disruption over dysfunction, so you want to make sure you can clean up the dysfunction and make sure your operation is working as smoothly as possible before doing a digital implementation. As Dwight mentioned, one of the things we've gotten is an assessment for that we've got actually a couple of assessments that one looks at for a digital implementation, the other looks for any kind of change management process of how efficient and effective is your organization, where are ways that you can tighten it up before implementing a major change. But there's a lot of factors at play here, and it's useful to tap into the expertise that can help you with that.
Excellent. Very good summary. Thank you all. I have sent you all a bubble in case you weren't able to find the unmute. So if you want to click on that, you would unmute yourself if you have a question to ask of us. It brings us down to the last minute. So I think everybody's happy with the content we've given and no questions, but I do reiterate that you can ask a question by email if you would like. So thank you all for your participation today, and do feel free to be in touch if you have any questions that we can help you with.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks.